I probably had first watch, and had the Pink 25 radio next to me, and we had it down real low on squelch, and it was pretty quiet. Jersey had told the artilleryman, he said, that he wanted any illumination to not be behind us, that he wanted it across the valley because he didn't want us lit up and silhouetted. And he says, if one round comes in, he told the guy from Hotel Battery 105, he says, I'll be coming and seeing you in the morning. Mm-hmm. And obviously the guy listened to him. Mm-hmm. So I did my watch. I don't know who did second watch, but I know that Paul De Benedetto, that we call Pizza, he had third watch. And about 2:30 in the morning, he reached across me, but I was sound asleep, and he shook Jersey awake, and he says, we've got a North Vietnamese unit going past us out on the trail. And Jersey said, how many have gone past? And Pizza said, at least 100 so far. So Jersey put his hand over my mouth and under the back of my head, put his knee on the M16. And so when I woke up, my first thing was I tried to pick my M16 up, and I couldn't do it. And he said, you just leave that weapon right here. There'll be no shooting until I do, if we have to shoot at all. Mm. So he sat me up. We watched them go past. They must have been a brand new unit just out of Laos, because they all had brand new uniforms and high and tight haircuts. And they were carrying crew-served weapons, everything from 51 cals to 82 mortars, lots of RPGs. So we waited until they got past, and Jersey got out his map, and he was looking at his watch, trying to time it. And then he called in to Hotel Battery for a fire mission for Gooks on the ground. And he got a hold of a guy named Lieutenant T-Van. And it was his first day as the artillery officer. Right. And this was his first fire mission. So when he told his men, that's what artillerymen live for, to actually have enemy in the open that they can find out their results. Right. And Jersey said to fire an airburst, and they must have had a time to use shell, and the airburst burst down the trail from us, maybe 500-600 meters. And he said, that should be right, fire for effect. And the company commander came on and wanted to know what was going on. And Jersey said he didn't have time to explain it. It didn't make company commander real happy, but in a situation like that, you have to understand. So I suppose there were between 40 and 50 105 rounds landed on the position on the trail going down. And the next morning, as soon as it got light enough, Jersey said, we're gonna sneak down there and see if there's any results. And we went down the trail, and there were many battle dressings, bloody battle dressings, and body parts laying around. No whole bodies and no weapons, though. They had policed all that up. The battalion commander in his Jeep was driving down the road past the rock crusher, and there were men from Echo Company drinking cans of Coca-Cola. that they had bought from the Vietnamese kids. So the battalion commander had the Jeep halted and called Lieutenant McClurg down and locked him up at attention and wanted to know why the kids were, why the men were drinking sodas. And we were only about 4 miles from LZ Baldy, and Lieutenant McClurg's answer to him was, well, I guess 4 miles from Baldy is too far for anybody to send Cokes or things out to the men. So if they're thirsty, I let them buy it from the locals. And the battalion commander said, "Go get your gear, you're relieved." And he put him in the back of the Jeep and relieved him of command. And stuck him in the rear at Baldy. I don't know what kind of job he was doing. It must not have been very important, but that's what was going on. And then after Lieutenant Garrett went home, he didn't go home. He went to S3, the intelligence shop, after his 6 months in the field. They needed, and then they had sent out an officer, and I'm not going to use his name or anything or say anything about him, other than the fact that he was woefully inept and only lasted about 2 weeks with us before he succumbed to heat stroke, and we had to medevac him and never saw him again. So now we're out there without a platoon commander, and they have to give the nod to Lieutenant McClurg, and he came out. And he was just an absolute breath of fresh air. I mean, Billy Baker and I were digging a U-shaped gun pit, and I had my shirt off, and I didn't have a cover on, and that was always a no-no. You were always supposed to have your shirt on, but you know, and so it was my turn to dig, and Billy says, "Uh-oh, here comes the lieutenant." And I thought, I'm going to get an ass chewing. And I turned around, and the lieutenant didn't have a cover on, and he didn't have a shirt on. And he said, "Oh, I come over to say hello to the gun team." And I thought, now this is a breath of fresh air. And so he talked to us a little bit, wanted to know how much time we had and, you know, where we were from. And then he left. And Billy, who was from Texas, he says to me, "Damn, Bates," he says, "that's one of the best damn Yankee officers I've ever seen." When we moved out, we went up on a little hill, and I was assigned to a strange fighting position. It was 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. And the emplacement, I'd never seen anything like it. The emplacement looked like it had been dug by a backhoe. It was perfect. And I think the other emplacements were the same way. Well, since I was going to have to use that as the machine gun pit, I took off my flak jacket. I got out my K-bar. I crawled down over the side into the trench, and I probed it with my K-bar to make sure there were no booby traps in it. And you have to be extremely careful right around the middle, because that's where people would tend to throw their gear first. But once I had made it through, I knew that the trench was clear. So I put my helmet and flak jacket down in the bottom, had the helmet sitting on my flak jacket, and I went down about 25 feet in front of, down the slope, and hooked up a trip flare. So, you know, anybody tried to come up on the gun during the night, hopefully they'd hit the trip flare first. As I was on my way back up the hill, I heard explosions in the perimeter, and there was an explosion behind me as I jumped, and I went head first into the trench and hit my head on my helmet and promptly knocked myself out. So it was probably a couple of minutes I was stunned before I regained consciousness and sat up and felt the side of my head, and I already had a knot there. So the official report says that they had fired 100 rounds of small arms ammunition at us, probably from AKs. They had dropped 7 82 millimeter mortar rounds on us, but everybody said they had counted 12. I hadn't. And they've also fired 2 RPGs at our position, and that was one of the ones that one of them was at me, and that's what had knocked me into the fighting position.
Yeah.
So that's the first day. On the second morning, okay, the next morning around noon, we went about 1 click to the next objective, and as soon as we got there, I looked over, and Ed Cruz had taken his M60 apart and was cleaning it. And I thought, well, that's a good idea, but I'm not going to clean mine at the same time. So pretty soon, Ed came over, very nonchalant, with his back toward this little flat-topped hill in front of us, and he says, "There's dudes climbing into the trees over there." And he says, don't look over, just pretend you don't see them. And he said, we're going to give them a mad minute. I said, okay. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. We went back. I don't know how many rounds I fired out of the 60 at it. It was just like spray and pray kind of stuff, because I couldn't see them. But some of the Marines said that they had actually seen North Vietnamese soldiers falling out of the trees. So Lieutenant McClure came over, and he said that he was going to do a react online and sweep the top of the hill. And whatever reason, because, when you're 20 years old, you're not always real smart. Mm. I asked permission to go with them. And I put Al Brown, my A-gunner, on the gun, and the ammo humper come over to be his A-gunner. And I took Al's M16 and bandoliers and went across with them and crossed a small stream, and up in front of us there was a bamboo hooch. I was watching it because I was going straight toward it, and the lieutenant, he was off to my right, and the M79 man was off to his right, and I could see movement inside the hooch. So I said, Lieutenant, I said, there's movement in that hooch. Do you want a blue? But he said, no, go forward and check it. It could be civilians. So I went forward, and I peeked in the opening. Well, I guess you would have called it a window, but there was just a hole in the bamboo. And in fact, there was a Vietnamese woman and children in there. I didn't see any males, and I just gave them the all clear sign, and I yelled civilians, and we went past it. And we started up the hill, and we got up to the top of the hill. I saw there was at least, it was a flat top escarpment, like a tabletop hill, and then it sloped down the back. And boy, it looked sketchy, and so, but I figured, well, we got to get to the other side. So I started double timing across the field, and green tracers were going from right to left in front of me and from left to right behind me. And I was kind of bracing for impact because I didn't think I was going to make it across there. But somehow I did, and I got to the edge of the hill, and I looked down over it, and there were North Vietnamese regulars zigzagging from tree to tree, trying to get out of the area. So I took them under fire with the M16, and I heard somebody coming, and I looked, and just to my left about 8 feet was Lieutenant McClurg, and he had his 1911 A1 45 in his hand, and he was running up, and all of a sudden his feet went out from under him, and he fell backwards, and I knew he was hit. So what I did was I reached and I pulled out a battle dressing, and I started crawling over to him, but he was losing arterial blood out of his neck, and I was taking a bath in it, crawling over to him, because that's where I had, wanted to try and put the dressing. When all of a sudden, Navy Corpsman, Doc Gary Weston, he ran up and knelt down behind him, and he said, put that dressing away. He says, you're going to start doing chest compressions, and I'm going to do mouth to mouth. Wow. And I said, okay. Well, I started chest compressions from the side, but there were still so many green tracers zipping by that it was so I just couldn't concentrate on what I was doing. So what I did was I just straddled the lieutenant's chest and kept my back to the incoming fire because I didn't want to see it. And then I was able to concentrate on doing the chest compressions. So I'm doing the chest compressions. He's doing mouth to mouth, and I'm thinking, man, maybe. But the interesting thing was, just before we started it, Lieutenant McClurg says, I'm hit in the shoulder and I can't move. That was the only thing he said the whole time. So, we're redoubling our effort when all of a sudden Doc starts to cough and he spits out a whole mouthful of blood. And he says, after he coughed a few times, he said to me, stop the compressions. And what he did was his hand that was cradled under, well, probably would have been his left hand, had actually gone into the brain stem of the lieutenant, and he could feel the brain with his fingertips. So when we took him out, they were covered with blood. So he he's gone. So we ceased trying to revive him. And I was so enraged that I went back over to the side where I had shooting at the North Vietnamese. And right down below it was a Vietnamese civilian hooch with pigs and chickens and dogs and stuff. It wasn't a real big hooch, but I was so mad, I shot every one of them. Mm. And when we came back into the perimeter, well, the other guys had been pinned down on the far side of the hill. They thought it was suicide to try to get across and over to it. They finally came over, and what they did was they secured his body and things. But I went down over the hill, and on the way down the hill, when I passed the little stream, I washed myself off because I was all covered with, sticky blood and everything, and cleaned myself up good as I could. And I went into the platoon position, and Staff Sergeant Harvey Russell came over to me, and he said, "Were you there when he was hit?" I said, "Yes." And he took his notebook out, and he says, "Then you tell me the after-action report." So I told him exactly what happened. And he says, "I'm going to call this in." He said, this is going to be the official report on the lieutenant's death. And I said, "Fine, that's how it happened." So that's what happened that day. Okay. Well, let's fast forward about 30 years, and I get a call from a Navy corpsman from hotel company who was sponsoring a reunion. I'm not sure where the reunion was. And he said to me, "I understand that you were present when Lieutenant McClurg passed." I said, "I was." He said, "Could you tell me the story?" So I told it to him. And he said, "I have a request." He says, "We got a call from Lieutenant McClurg's father. He's now an old man. He's living in Florida, but he's never talked to anyone who was there with his son when he passed." He says, he said, "I have his phone number. Would you consider calling him?" But he said, "I want you to sanitize the story." I says, "I understand." So I called him that evening, and I told him the story. And of course, he said that Lieutenant McClurg's mother never got over it. And they had moved to Florida, and then she had passed away, and he had never got over it. And I said, "Listen," I said, "if I can offer you any solace whatsoever," I said, "there was a Marine doing chest compressions on his chest while a Navy corpsman was doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation." And I said, "Rest assured, sir, that it was in the finest act of the sea service towards a dying comrade."